The following is a presentation of the Mat Talk Podcast Network.
It's time to attack. With the Attack Style Wrestling Podcast. Here on the Attack Style Wrestling Podcast, you'll find youth and high school coaching tips for coaches, parents, and wrestlers, featuring Gable-trained NCAA champion and Hall of Fame high school coach Daryl Weber. Also featured is a monthly dialogue with legendary wrestling coach Dan Gable. Find out more on AttackStyleWrestling.com. Now, on to the show. Now up on the Attack Style Wrestling Podcast, Jason Bryan here with you. Today we're talking trade secrets. Secret stuff here with NCAA champion Daryl Weber, Hall of Fame high school coach. And Daryl, this is something that when we talk about coaches sharing knowledge, you borrow a couple things and you put them all together. That's called coaching. If you're a journalist and you take something once, it's called plagiarism. You're a wrestling coach, you take something once and implement it, it's called coaching. So there's always been a focus on technique. But today we're talking about some of these classified coaching secrets. And you've got a couple scenarios that you want to talk about. You've got some anecdotes with them. And well, before we even get to that, let's just talk about that concept of sharing trade secrets when it comes from a technique standpoint or from a mental training standpoint. There's definitely a line that coaches tend not to cross.
Yeah, I think there's surface level tactics and things that are going on in programs that our coaches are doing, and you can go to a tournament and you can see coach so and so who's got the state championship team. Well, they're working this finish to their single legs or this or that, or you see them practice maybe in the summer at camp, stuff like that. But there's a lot of things that go on behind the scenes, a lot of hard decisions, a lot of coaching tactics. And that's where I was trying to think of a good title for this, and try to think of some really hard hitting, not maybe minor things or things that aren't talked about a lot that make huge differences in the program or the team or with individual wrestlers. And like I was telling you, hopefully the wrestling FBI won't investigate us for releasing these classified tactics, Jason.
Yeah, and the thing is, a lot of them, it's funny, you mentioned, the technical aspect of it, on how that team does. So I'll look at a team out in Colorado, for example, and I use Pine Creek as an example because they had a really good program, and they were a tilt team. They were a team that liked the Mason tilt, the Fairfax roll. We'll even give Brian Hazard his ego stroke here, the Hazard tilt, and they really train that. And you'd see a lot of coaches come up to him, yeah, how do you finish that when you get here? And there'd be no problem explaining how they adjusted their hands. And this is like a tactic that this coach is probably going to use to either teach this or beat you with it, yet they're not willing to share the most simple things that involve athlete welfare and things like that, because they feel like you said, it's a trade secret. And again, that wrestling FBI is going to hunt them down. Let's just start with something that's one of the most simple things in the sport of wrestling, because wrestling teaches mental toughness. Wrestling is about pushing through. And I think the Jay Robinson quote was, discipline is doing something you don't want to do when you don't want to do it. That's basically the sport of wrestling, because nobody wants to go to practice all the time that much longer when you're like, all right, coach is going to run us through a wall today. But the key is making the athlete make up their own mind and realizing it's kind of like that, like mental manipulation. Like, this is actually your idea when it's actually my idea the whole time. There's some tricky tactics that some coaches have used over the years that really get in the mind of an athlete and say, this was really your idea the whole time.
Yeah. I mean, in anything, not just wrestling, but if you've got something, if you got an idea, or, especially as a coach, you might know that this is the best thing for this individual, or this is the best thing for our team, but maybe they don't get it, or maybe even their parents don't get it at that point. They think they're on this track and they think they're doing this. It's going to be much better to convince them in some fashion and have them make up their mind that this is the best path, and get them to change their own mind rather than force feed it down their throat. You want them to be excited about whatever decision they make. And, a lot of times it might backfire if you really try, just say maybe you want a kid to change a weight class. Maybe it's best for the team, or maybe it's best for him. Maybe he's got it set or the wrestler's got it set in their head that they got to get to this weight and they're cutting too much weight. And, and I've seen this happen, in that scenario, you could say, no, you're not going that weight class. It's not good for you. And maybe they're hearing at home. Maybe they just got in their head that they have to cut a bunch of weight to win. This is just one scenario. There's a lot of different scenarios that we could be talking about. And I actually have one where probably the best Jedi mind trick Coach Gable pulled on me that I'm going to tell you about once we kind of explain this and get into it. But yeah, it's just, and sometimes when you've got decisions like this, you might have to go to the parent, if you have an involved parent, you might have to go to the parent and kind of say, hey, listen, this is what I feel is best. You might have to get involved with the influencers in that kid's life as well. So, I think a lot of times, everybody kind of probably knows this concept, but I don't know how good everybody is at it. How much patience they have. And this is a tactic that I see, like I said, I see the best coaches pull off and put a lot of thought into and really get working for themselves. Because like I said, if you're going to make a move or you want somebody to do something that just, if they don't maybe initially believe in, it's going to be best if they make up their own mind.
Now, and also there's that word manipulation. It's not necessarily a bad thing. And that's something that we have to maintain, that like, look, we're just trying to convince kids that they're making the right decision, even though they may be hesitant about making that decision.
I don't like manipulation doesn't really come to mind when I'm thinking about this. It's anytime this is going on, it's typically in the best interest of either an individual or the team in general, and you've got a way, as a coach, you can't be selfish and manipulate kids into doing things just for your own benefits, or you have to see them see the, and it's going to be hard to do what we're saying if you don't have good reasoning and a righteous reason to do these things, and proof behind it, and so that it's going to work out best for them and the team typically in general.
I want to unfold a scenario that's very common in high school wrestling when you're dealing with getting kids to make a decision. I got a phone call not that long ago from my hometown, and somebody was asking about how they get their kid not. There's a kid that was playing football, wasn't sure he wanted to wrestle, and they were looking for advice on what to tell the kid to kind of convince him to wrestle. And that's probably one of the bigger discussion points we have with this, is getting them to make up their own mind versus, kind of forcing their hand. When it's about a kid that doesn't know if they want to be in the wrestling room. They might be burnt out from playing 3 sports, and then they've had a long football season coming off a playoff run or something, and then they go right into their season. I mean, that's the type of discussion I think that a lot of coaches have that they're really afraid to talk about, is how they, how they talk that kid into staying with the sport of wrestling, even though, as a coach, they probably need a little bit of a break.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of the whole deal. I talk about this all the time, but there's people that come to attack style wrestling coaches, and they, they're struggling with different things. It's not always like the surface level stuff. And I talk about how important it is. If you want to be a good coach, you've got to understand, you've got to study, read books on, you read marketing books and communication books, how to speak to people, how to interact, personal relationship books. You need to understand this stuff if you want to be really good and really effective. So like in that scenario, you can't just look at it from your viewpoint. Coach wants you to get as much practice as absolute possible, get in there right after football season, blah, blah, blah. You got to look at their perspective, and you've got to frame things, with their perspective in mind. So, and keep the big picture in mind as well. So in that scenario, and that's something that, I dealt with a bunch, it all starts with every time you see him in the hall, all football season, patting him on the back and putting your arm around him and telling him how excited you are to get him in the wrestling room. And I hope they're doing good in football, and you build this rapport. And when football season is over, you got to be able to read those kids. And if you're getting that feeling, hey, if you're fired up, you want to get in right now, let's get in right now. But you know what? I understand if you're wore out and you need a week off or something like that. And, you communicate with the parents too, because you don't want him saying that he's going to wrestling practice for a week while he's taking it off and running around doing God knows what. So, you got to put their perspective into the equation and frame your pitch so it speaks to them as well. It speaks to their needs as well.
So when you talk about finding those needs and making sure that the decision is yours, you alluded to a little Dan Gable Jedi mind trick, and let's kind of get that backstory, because I think everybody that listens to this program always likes to hear your little Gable anecdotes, because sometimes they might not be what people expect from Coach Gable.
Yeah, I mean, this was he never came out and told me what he did here, but this is something that I figured out, over the years, after I got coaching and looked back, and I said, wow, man, he really like steered me in the right way, and really helped me out. And it was my senior year. So my senior year, need a little backstory to get the full picture. So my sophomore year, I was wrestling 158. The team was kind of struggling. And when we're talking about struggling for that team,
struggling for Iowa is being ranked second, Yeah,
we lost a duel by a couple points, and we didn't have the NCAAs locked up at the time. And so they pulled out, and I was struggling a little bit at 158. I just lost a match in a dual meet, and we got back from that duel. It was actually against Minnesota, and they said, "All right, Weber, you're going to wrestle. We're going to pull Joe Williams out of red shirt." We wrestled off. He beat me off the team. I ended up that year, I cut down 2 weight classes to 142, made the team, was an All-American. So then my junior year, he red shirts again. Joe Williams does. And I take 6th in the country at 158. I go back to 158 and I wrestle there. And so we've got Williams has done his red shirt. He's a 58 pounder. I'm a returning All-American 58 pounder. He All-American 2 years ago at 58. And, so the whole off season between my junior and senior year, people are asking me, what are you going to do? What weight are you going to go next year? And I'm like, I'm going 158. Nobody's taking my, I'm not giving up my spot. And I was training hard and had that in my head, and put yourself in the coaching staff's perspective. Now you got both of us going 58. 2 All-Americans, and I never hear a peep out of the entire coaching staff. Like, if that was me, I would be sweating that a little bit. Like, come on, Weber better get, pack some weight on and get ready to move up a weight or something like that. But I never heard a peep all off season. And whenever somebody asked me, my ego got in the way, and I was like, I'm going 158. But the whole time I was kind of I was lifting hard, putting on muscle. I got a lot bigger. And so the whole off season goes by. Nobody's sweating it. Or like the coaching staff, nobody's telling me what to do. And one of the first, we used to, in the beginning of the season, in the fall, we would go on these long runs. And they're like a 4-mile loop, and then you'd end with some sprints and whatnot. And we go out there. It's one of the first ones. And Gable had never done this before. And he goes, okay, I'm going to have half you guys run this direction, half the team run the other direction. And he goes, okay, 158 and below, you go this way. 167 and above, you go this way. And right that instant, I ran with the 167 and above. And I honestly really never made my mind up until like that point, or at least outwardly didn't show it. And then so I come back in, we go on the run, and I come running in, and we finish up the workout, and Gable comes strolling up to me, and he goes, Weber, I see you ran with the 167s and above. That mean you're going 67? Yeah, coach, I'm going 67. And then the rest was history. I went on and won the NCAA title that year. And, I don't know if I would have had the confidence or the, been able to pull it off if I would have been forced to do it. Maybe I would have felt sorry for myself or something like that. But anyways, that's a perfect example. Is he didn't really force me to do anything. I guess he just let me guide myself. But then he kind of, I'm sure he was going to have to pull the trigger at some point, or we were going to have wrestle offs, but he probably figured it'd be best just to get both of us going on the right path. But yeah, he had never split the team up like that before in all the years I was there running.
Do you think that was specifically because of you and Joe at 158 to say, all right, let's see what these two do here?
Oh yeah, I'm sure it was. I'm sure it was on his mind, the whole off season. He talks about how after NCAAs every year, after he lost the year he was going for number 10, he's told me this story. He started doing, right after NCAAs, he started to kind of do more planning and reflection. So he got in this routine after, he was going for number 10. He lost number 10. He had to regroup and evaluate what he was doing. And he always talks about how up to that point after nationals, he would spend the next month or couple weeks doing interviews and all this stuff. And he didn't really take the time to reflect on maybe what he could have done better and plan for the next year. And so he got in a routine of doing that. And one of the things he would do is he would sit down and he had a system to this. And he had a chart, and he would try to map out so that he had 2.5 guys, wrestlers, at every weight class. And if he didn't, that's how he, kind of worked his recruiting and stuff like and planned ahead. So knowing that now, it had to be in his head. Okay, we've got Weber and Williams at 158. What are we going to do here? We got to split these guys up to get our best team. So I think, it was weighing on him. He was wondering how he was going to attack it, and that was probably just an easy way to see if he could handle the situation without any drama.
What did you learn from a coach? What lessons does something like that teach an athlete who goes into coaching? And where have you implemented something like that you said, this goes back to my senior year and Gable really doing the Jedi mind trick?
Well, I think first you recognize the importance of not force feeding things. And even if you have to, just straight up tell, anytime you pitch something to somebody, that that they might not be seen at that point, they might not be seeing it clearly. You got to have good reasoning and a good explanation. You can't just go in and be like, well, I think you need to do this because I think it's the best. No, you got to go in with your ducks in a row, and it's got to be based off of. I think it's very, very important. I talk about this all the time. I think it's very important for a coach to have a manual that he can give, or they can give their parents and their coaches whenever they come in the program. Typically at the beginning of the year, that lays out their philosophies. Obviously you got your rules, but your expectations, your philosophies. Your how you're going to do wrestle offs, what you expect. And, it's got, and then you can always fall back on those. So if you have, these philosophies and these beliefs that you want these kids to learn, you can always use that manual in your decision-making process for yourself, and as well as how you explain yourself. If you've got in your manual that we're basing our decisions off XYZ, then you can always pull those out, and they've been exposed to that. So even if you have to address it head on, you need to go in armed with good reasoning behind all of it. And then if you know that you might prep the situation with a good speech or with a call to dad or mom, and let them know what's going on, and give them the reasons and the thought process behind it so that they understand where you're coming from and they don't think they're being taken advantage of or manipulated or used in any fashion. You need to lay out all the cards on the table and make sure those cards and that decision is backed by, solid, positive decision making.
Yeah, I'm looking to see if you have a scenario at Christiansburg when you were coaching there. You had a lot of state champions, a lot of state place winners, and always bunched around the same weights. I mean, it was boom, 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 boom. Was there a situation you sat back and said, this is a lot like that senior year, and the kids actually took care of it on their own?
Yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, there's a lot. We were known for juggling our lineup at the end of the year and moving defending state champs up a weight, even 2 weight classes.
Yeah, Joey Dance, you put up to what was it, senior? He went to 32 or is it 38? What that was crazy.
I can't remember exactly, but he went up 2 weight classes. Him and JR were both. They went up 2 weight classes to fit other kids in spots where we felt they would be more successful. And we wouldn't you're not going to do something like that unless you have total confidence in the move. There was always a thought process behind moves like that, changing lineups. You don't change a lineup and roll the dice if your starter is maybe going to win at the weight class above, and he could win it for sure at one weight class. You got to keep the individual's, success in perspective as well. A lot of times. So yeah, I mean, there was a lot of I mean, that's at the end of the year too. That's after things are unfolding. One thing that you have to deal with as a high school coach is wrestle-offs, and wrestle-offs are brutal on high school kids. They're absolutely brutal. I mean, it's one of the most, it's one of the ways you can lose kids quick, if you don't handle them properly. So a lot of times, rather than forcing those wrestle-offs, you're better off addressing things, in the fall or early on, and trying to get them on different paths so that you're not forced to handle that situation. Because I've had many kids quit because they didn't, they couldn't see themselves making the lineup, and you got to try to build a culture so that doesn't happen. But that's a scenario that you try to cut off at the pass, and you can't just come in. You can't come in and say, "Listen, Johnny, you can't beat so-and-so, so you're going to move up this weight class." That's not fair, and plus that doesn't help those kids make each other tougher. So you got to look at the situation, and you got to use logic, and you got to see what they're thinking as well. So you got to take all those factors into account. You might ask, and the one thing that we would always do at the beginning of the year to help this process is I would hand out a sheet of paper. But I wouldn't ask anybody. I'd just hand out a sheet of paper to everybody and say, write down the number one weight class you want to wrestle. And typically I would get those back and everything, because as coaches, you might be like, well, we got to get this kid here and this kid there to make the best lineup. How are we going to do that? And then you hand out those papers, they come back and they've already figured it out themselves. But sometimes no, sometimes not.
Wrapping up this first part of this new series on classified coaching secrets. Today, we've been talking with Coach Joe Weber about getting the athlete to make up their own mind versus you actually making the directive. And Coach Weber he's got that Dan Gable story. He's got the mind trick. So if you want to check out more about what Attack Styles got with these coaching tips, these classified secrets, listen for the next several episodes. We're going to be breaking down things that aren't really discussed amongst the coaches and how we can prepare our athletes and prepare ourselves as coaches here on the Attack Style Wrestling Podcast.
Show is part of the Mat Talk Podcast Network. For more wrestling podcasts, head over to MatTalkOnline.com.